The sun blazed over Egypt's endless deserts, casting long shadows across dunes that have stood for millennia, guarding secrets the world has yet to uncover. Along the banks of the Nile, where life once thrived in rhythm with the river's pulse, a discovery emerged that would challenge everything scholars thought they knew. In a hidden jar, buried beneath layers of time, lay the Nag Hammadi Library, a collection of ancient manuscripts whose fragile pages whispered truths long thought lost. These texts were no ordinary relics. They spoke of alternative histories, forbidden wisdom, and teachings that Orthodox Christianity would later obscure. Every scroll hinted at a world where knowledge was a dangerous treasure, where power and belief intertwined to control not just empires, but the minds of men. Scholars and treasure hunters alike would later wonder, how much of what we accept as history is merely the shadow of a carefully curated narrative? The psychological weight of such a discovery is impossible to ignore. Imagine learning that the foundations of faith, morality, and human understanding might be incomplete, or worse, deliberately concealed. The Nag Hammadi texts do not simply offer stories of the past, they beckon us to question our present, to challenge the narratives that have long guided civilizations. As we embark on this journey, the line between fact and speculation begins to blur. Here, in the sands of Egypt, lies a confrontation between orthodox history and forbidden knowledge, a confrontation that forces us to ask, what truths have been buried alongside these manuscripts, and who decided they were too dangerous for the world to see? In the blistering summer of 1945, in a quiet corner of Upper Egypt, a local farmer stumbled upon a find that would ripple through the worlds of history, religion, and mystery alike. 13 clay jars, tucked into a shallow cave near the town of Nag Hammadi, lay undisturbed for centuries, their surfaces coated in centuries of dust and time. Inside each jar rested fragile papyrus codices, bound not in leather or gold, but in simple, unassuming leather covers, their edges frayed, their ink faded to sepia whispers. To the casual observer, they might have seemed like nothing more than old scraps, yet what they contained would challenge the boundaries of what the world thought it knew about early Christian thought, philosophy, and the very nature of faith. The discovery was accidental, yet almost cinematic in its precision. Local farmers digging for fertilizer, their hands dark with earth and sweat, had unearthed knowledge long hidden beneath layers of desert silence. There was no fanfare, no grand unveiling, just the awe of those first who glimpsed the writings, their curiosity mingled with caution. Scholars would later flood the region, driven by the promise of understanding, employing microscopes, carbon dating, and painstaking translations to authenticate the codices. Scientific rigor met the raw, almost otherworldly aura of texts that seemed to whisper secrets meant for only the initiated. Among the pages were dialogues, hymns, and treatises attributed to long-forgotten Gnostic teachers, presenting an alternative narrative to the canonical texts, one that questioned authority, interpreted divinity differently, and offered a more intimate path to knowledge and enlightenment. Every line of ink seemed to pulse with the voices of the ancients, as if the manuscripts themselves were alive, yearning to be heard again after centuries of silence. Yet the excitement of discovery was tempered by the weight of secrecy. Rumors spread, who should have access, who might profit, and which powers might want the knowledge hidden. The codices were not merely historical artifacts, they were keys to understanding a parallel spiritual history, one that had been deliberately buried, perhaps to preserve orthodoxy, perhaps to shield dangerous truths from prying eyes. In that dim cave, beneath the relentless Egyptian sun, the past collided with the present. 13 jars, 13 codices, and the fragile whispers of Gnostic wisdom suddenly emerged from the shadows. The world would never look at early Christianity, or the nature of hidden knowledge, the same way again. Long before the neatly organized doctrines of modern Christianity, there existed groups whose beliefs veered sharply from the paths most would recognize today. Among them were the Gnostics, a name whispered through the corridors of history, often associated with secrecy, heresy, and a profound hunger for hidden knowledge. The Nag Hammadi texts, buried for centuries in the sands of Egypt, are their fingerprints on the ancient world. But who were these people? And why did they risk so much to record their beliefs in cryptic codices? The Gnostics were not a monolithic sect, but a network of thinkers, mystics, and philosophers who shared a central conviction: the material world was a flawed, often corrupt reflection of a higher, spiritual reality. Salvation, they argued, was not found in obedience to external authorities, but through gnosis, a personal, inner knowledge of the divine spark within. Their writings brim with intricate cosmologies, multiple gods, archons who imprison the soul, and a universe layered with mysteries beyond ordinary comprehension. To the uninitiated, these ideas could seem alien, even heretical. To the initiated, they were revelations, a map to ultimate truth hidden behind allegory and metaphor. Scholars have long debated the authorship of these texts. Were they the product of a single sect or the collective output of diverse communities spread across the Mediterranean? The surviving manuscripts suggest a collaborative tradition, one that evolved over decades, perhaps even centuries. Some writings reflect deep philosophical influence from Plato and other Hellenistic thinkers, while others hint at distinctly Jewish or early Christian roots. This blending of influences makes it difficult to assign a single author or even a definitive school of thought, yet it is precisely this mystery that has fascinated historians, theologians, and seekers of forbidden knowledge alike. Fringe theories abound. Some propose that the Gnostics were custodians of ancient secrets older than Christianity itself, fragments of wisdom preserved from civilizations lost to time. Others suggest that their radical ideas were so threatening that Orthodox authorities deliberately erased their legacy, forcing their teachings into hidden caches like those at Nag Hammadi. Whether one leans toward skeptical scholarship or speculative intrigue, the tension between accepted history and tantalizing possibility is palpable. Each scroll, each parable, offers a glimpse into a worldview that refuses to conform to conventional narratives, a philosophy that challenges readers to question the very nature of reality and faith. Ultimately, the authorship of the Nag Hammadi texts remains an enigma, a puzzle that straddles history and myth. The Gnostics left us riddles wrapped in parables, exhortations hidden in allegory, and visions that defy simple explanation. In their hands, the act of writing was both rebellion and revelation, a way to preserve knowledge deemed too dangerous for the mainstream world. And as we turn the fragile pages today, we are confronted not only with their stories but with their challenge, to look beyond the obvious, to seek truths hidden beneath layers of belief and dogma, and to wonder what other secrets the ancient world still guards. The Nag Hammadi texts present a vision of the cosmos that is unlike anything found in Orthodox Christianity. In these scrolls, the universe is not simply a creation of a benevolent God, it is layered, complex, and riddled with hidden powers. Some texts describe a supreme, unknowable God existing beyond the material universe, while the world we inhabit is the creation of lesser, often flawed beings. These beings, sometimes called the archons, govern the material realm, keeping humanity trapped in ignorance. It is a radical inversion of traditional theology. The God who rules the heavens in Orthodox texts is replaced by a mysterious, distant principle, while the world's architects are neither purely divine nor entirely malevolent, but deeply ambivalent and flawed. One of the most shocking elements is the reinterpretation of human origins. The Gnostic texts suggest that humans carry a spark of divine light, a fragment of the true God, trapped within the physical body by the archons. Salvation, then, is not simply faith or obedience, it is knowledge. Gnosis, the awakening to hidden truths, is the path to liberation. Imagine the psychological implications of this, a hidden reality within ourselves, waiting to be discovered, while the world above us functions as a cage. For centuries, these texts were suppressed, labeled heretical, hidden away from the faithful, as if the knowledge itself were too dangerous for ordinary eyes. The allegories are dense, almost cryptic. In one text, Sophia, a divine figure, falls from the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality, bringing chaos and imperfection into the world. Her descent mirrors humanity's own entrapment, a cosmic drama encoded in myth, yet possibly echoing historical or psychological truths about power, knowledge, and the human condition. The texts challenge readers to question what is real: is this mythology, or is it a coded memory of a lost spiritual understanding, perhaps even suppressed science of consciousness? Scholars have debated for decades whether these Gnostic ideas are purely symbolic or whether they preserve fragments of pre-Christian religious thought that mainstream churches sought to erase. Some argue that the texts encode insights into human psychology, morality, and the nature of suffering, wrapped in esoteric allegory. Others speculate that they hint at literal cosmic hierarchies, secret teachings of an ancient and sophisticated sect, the knowledge of which was deliberately kept from ordinary followers. What makes these scrolls haunting is their accessibility. They speak directly to the reader, daring them to think beyond conventional truths. They blur the line between myth and potential history, forcing a confrontation with uncomfortable questions. Why were these teachings hidden? What truths did the early church fear? And perhaps most unsettlingly, if this knowledge was real, what power did it hold over those who understood it? In the shadowy world of Gnostic thought, every myth, every allegory, could be a key to understanding the universe not as it appears, but as it truly is. The scrolls found at Nag Hammadi shatter the familiar image of Jesus. In these texts, he is not merely a figure of miracles and parables, but a teacher of hidden wisdom, a revealer of secrets deliberately obscured by orthodox narratives. The Gospel of Thomas, for instance, presents a Jesus who speaks in riddles, urging his followers to seek knowledge within themselves rather than rely on institutional authority. He is less the distant savior of popular imagination and more a cryptic guide, whispering truths meant only for those willing to question everything they've been told. Consider the Gospel of Philip, which offers unsettling glimpses into the relationships between Jesus and his followers, especially Mary Magdalene. Here, Mary is not a peripheral figure but a central companion, possibly even a bearer of esoteric insight. The texts hint at teachings that challenge conventional hierarchies. Spiritual knowledge, not bloodline or temple rituals, is what grants true connection to the divine. The implications are profound. If these writings reflect authentic traditions, then centuries of ecclesiastical authority may have systematically muted voices that dared to portray Jesus differently. The tone of these scrolls is intimate and urgent. Jesus speaks of the kingdom of light that exists within, suggesting a radical inward turn, a spiritual revolution that bypasses the very structures that would come to define Christianity. He frames existence itself as a puzzle, each individual holding a piece of a cosmic mystery, accessible only through personal insight and gnosis, the secret knowledge these texts so fervently promote. The ordinary narratives of miracles and judgment are stripped away, replaced by instruction on self-realization and the recognition of hidden realities. Yet, controversy shadows every line. How could these perspectives have been lost? Why did Orthodox Christianity suppress them? Scholars argue that the Gnostic texts were considered dangerous precisely because they undermined centralized control. They offered a form of empowerment, suggesting that salvation was not granted through obedience but discovered through understanding. It's as if these scrolls carried a message too potent for the authorities of the time, a revelation that could topple theological hierarchies. Reading the Nag Hammadi codices today, a sense of cinematic drama unfolds. Jesus is no longer confined to a wooden cross, he walks the shadows of clandestine knowledge, a figure who challenges, teases, and sometimes even frightens the reader with questions that have no easy answers. The tension between what is known and what is hidden, between canonical faith and suppressed insight, creates a narrative both mesmerizing and unsettling. By exploring these texts, we confront a version of Jesus that history largely forgot. A teacher of mysteries, a disruptor of institutions, a harbinger of forbidden knowledge, the scrolls compel us to ask, what else has been silenced? And if the true message of Jesus was never meant for the masses, how might that reshape our understanding of faith, power, and history itself? The answers remain elusive, buried in words written thousands of years ago, waiting for those willing to listen. Beneath the quiet dust of centuries, in the deserts of Egypt, a discovery was made that would forever challenge our understanding of early Christianity, the Nag Hammadi Library. Among the papyrus scrolls and codices lay a small, unassuming text, the Gospel of Thomas. Unlike the familiar accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, this Gospel is not a narrative of miracles or parables, it is a collection of 114 sayings, enigmatic and often unsettling, attributed to Jesus himself. Here, words shimmer between wisdom and riddle, each sentence a potential key to a hidden truth. What makes the Gospel of Thomas so captivating, and so controversial, is precisely what mainstream Christianity rejected: its insistence on personal enlightenment, on discovering the kingdom within oneself, rather than in a distant heaven. In Thomas, salvation is not a reward or a ritual, it is an awakening. The kingdom of God is inside you, the text insists, a radical departure from doctrines built around church authority and structured dogma. For historians and mystics alike, this presents a puzzle: why were these sayings omitted from the canonical Gospels? And what does their exclusion say about the forces that shaped early Christian thought? Scholars argue over origins. Some date Thomas to the mid-1st century, suggesting it may have been as close to Jesus's actual teachings as any text we possess. Others see it as a later Gnostic work, a spiritual manifesto reflecting secretive sects that thrived in the shadows of Roman persecution. Either way, the Gospel of Thomas confronts us with a haunting question: what truths were deemed too dangerous, too heretical, to survive in public faith? Mystery intertwines with history in every line. Sayings like, "Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there," provoke more questions than answers. Are they metaphors, or cryptic codes for spiritual practice? Could the text contain knowledge that was deliberately hidden from wider society, a guide for initiates in the path of enlightenment? The cinematic allure of Thomas lies in its elusiveness. Each saying teases, promising revelation while withholding certainty. For the modern seeker, historians, spiritual explorers, and conspiracy enthusiasts alike, this text represents a tantalizing bridge between the known and the forbidden. It is a reminder that history is rarely linear, that what survives on papyrus may be only a fragment of a larger, lost narrative. As we turn the fragile pages, we feel a whisper from the past, a voice that challenges dogma, encourages introspection, and invites us to question: what if the most profound truths were never meant to be broadcast, but discovered quietly, within the mind and heart of the seeker? In Thomas, the line between myth and reality blurs, and we are left suspended between curiosity and revelation, staring into a text that has haunted scholars and mystics for centuries. Beneath the surface of the ancient texts lies a world of rituals, secretive gatherings, and practices that seem almost otherworldly. Initiates of the Gnostic sects were not merely followers, they were seekers of forbidden knowledge, instructed in rites that blurred the line between the material and the spiritual. Some scrolls describe meditation techniques that induced visions of cosmic hierarchies, where angels and archons dictated the fate of the soul. Others speak of symbolic purification, secret prayers, and ceremonies that took place in hidden chambers, away from prying eyes. Historians often contrast these accounts with the stark reality: the Gnostic communities were small, often persecuted, and fragmented. Archaeological evidence, fragments of codices, pottery inscriptions, and ritual artifacts, paints a picture of disciplined spiritual practice, yet leaves more questions than answers. How much of what we read is literal, and how much is allegorical? Were these rituals genuinely mystical, or carefully constructed myths to instill a sense of belonging and hierarchy among initiates? Some scholars argue that the practices described were attempts to understand consciousness itself, long before modern psychology. Vision quests, symbolic interpretations of dreams, and meditative journeys appear strikingly similar to later esoteric traditions across the world, from Tibetan Tantra to Hermetic mysticism in Renaissance Europe. Could it be that these Gnostic practices represent a hidden thread of human spiritual evolution, deliberately concealed by history, only whispering through fragmented scrolls? Then there are the tantalizing legends, secret codes embedded in the texts, instructions for summoning or communicating with higher intelligences, or cryptic guidance on unlocking hidden potentials within the human mind. Skeptics dismiss these as metaphorical, yet the allure remains. What if, for a chosen few, these practices offered a glimpse of truths inaccessible to ordinary perception? Transitioning from the concrete to the mysterious, this section sets up a haunting question: if these rituals were lost to time, what other knowledge might have been deliberately hidden from the world? The viewer is invited to imagine initiation in candlelit rooms, whispers of cosmic insight, and the tantalizing brush with forbidden wisdom, a secret path that, perhaps, still exists, waiting to be rediscovered. For centuries, the Nag Hammadi texts lay buried in silence, hidden from the public eye, their knowledge obscured by time, sand, and secrecy. When these ancient scrolls first surfaced in 1945, the world should have witnessed a monumental shift in understanding early Christianity. Instead, they were met with caution, skepticism, and, in some cases, outright dismissal. Scholars debated their authenticity, religious authorities questioned their relevance, and rumors of confiscation and concealment swirled in hushed academic circles. The content of these texts was unsettling for many. They revealed alternative gospels, secret teachings, and interpretations of Christ that diverged sharply from canonical scripture. Where the Bible spoke in parables and official doctrine, the Nag Hammadi codices hinted at hidden knowledge, a gnosis accessible only to those willing to seek beyond the surface. For some authorities, this was not merely inconvenient, it was dangerous. The possibility that ordinary believers might access teachings that challenged centuries of dogma threatened both control and orthodoxy. Accounts from the mid-20th century suggest that parts of the collection vanished mysteriously after discovery. Some scrolls entered private collections, others were kept in secret archives, and a few were published selectively, often with editorial choices that downplayed their radical messages. The question lingers, were these texts deliberately suppressed, or were their obscurity simply a consequence of bureaucratic caution and scholarly skepticism? Evidence hints at more than coincidence. Letters, private testimonies, and archival records suggest that influential figures in both religious and academic spheres were determined to shape how, and even whether, the public would ever encounter these writings. Controversy deepened as interpretations clashed. Scholars who approached the codices from a historical or linguistic perspective emphasized their value as cultural artifacts, while theologians debated their doctrinal implications. To some, they were revolutionary, a glimpse into forgotten communities and forbidden knowledge. To others, they were dangerous distractions, capable of undermining faith or inspiring heresy. Treasure hunters, opportunists, and curious researchers added another layer of intrigue, chasing fragments that seemed to disappear as quickly as they appeared. Amid this web of conflict, secrecy, and selective publication, one chilling possibility emerges: perhaps the suppression was never accidental. The notion that powerful forces, religious institutions, academic gatekeepers, even governments, may have deliberately obscured these texts invites a tantalizing mystery. What truths were deemed too dangerous to reveal? And what might still lie hidden, waiting to challenge everything we think we know about the origins of Christianity and the pursuit of secret knowledge? In this shadowy interplay of fact and speculation, the Nag Hammadi codices persist as both historical treasure and enigmatic puzzle, their full significance still unfolding, a reminder that the past is never entirely at rest, and some truths remain deliberately buried. As we step into the present day, the echoes of ancient mysteries are more than just historical curiosities, they subtly shape modern thought, spirituality, and even science. This section begins by connecting the dots between the ancient knowledge uncovered in earlier sections and contemporary interpretations. For instance, we explore how scholars are re-evaluating historical records, sometimes finding evidence that challenges conventional chronology or accepted truths. The narrative contrasts rational scientific explanations with mystical interpretations. For example, while archaeologists may see certain structures as simple engineering feats, fringe theorists suggest encoded messages, forgotten technologies, or even extraterrestrial influence. Highlight these contrasts visually and narratively to maintain suspense: shadowy ancient symbols juxtaposed with modern laboratories, ritualistic imagery versus computer-modeled reconstructions. Next, examine the influence of these mysteries on modern spirituality and philosophy. Secret texts, lost artifacts, or unexplained phenomena have inspired meditation practices, alternative healing techniques, and even ethical frameworks. Show how these elements bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and contemporary curiosity, suggesting that the past may still guide the future. Include anecdotal examples of thinkers, scientists, or spiritual leaders who reference these ancient enigmas in their work. Then, dive into the social and cultural impact. How have these mysteries permeated art, literature, film, and pop culture? Explore the paradox: while mainstream science often dismisses such ideas as fantasy, the public fascination endures, fueling documentaries, conspiracy theories, and endless debate forums. Use cinematic tension to emphasize the ongoing conflict between mainstream acceptance and fringe belief, leaving viewers questioning which narratives hold the most truth. Finally, this section should provoke reflection, encourage viewers to consider what these ancient enigmas reveal about human curiosity, the nature of knowledge, and the thin line between myth and reality. Close with a visual or narrative hook hinting at unresolved questions, setting up the final section as a powerful conclusion that unites history, mystery, and the viewer's imagination. The story of the Nag Hammadi texts is not just about brittle papyrus bound in leather, or fragments of forgotten philosophy. It is about the fragile line between what we think we know, and the hidden truths waiting just beyond the veil of history. When the villagers of Upper Egypt stumbled upon those clay jars in 1945, they had no idea they were unearthing a time capsule sealed with silence for more than 15 centuries. What they carried back to their homes, and in some cases even used as fuel for their cooking fires, was more explosive than any treasure of gold. It was knowledge that challenged authority, rewrote the narrative, and whispered of a world where the human soul was not a pawn of institutions but a fragment of something divine. And yet, as quickly as these writings resurfaced, they were surrounded by shadow. Pages went missing. Some were locked away in vaults. For years, scholars had only partial access. It raises a question that lingers like smoke in the air: who decides which truths the world is ready to hear? Some say the Nag Hammadi library was simply the work of fringe thinkers, a forgotten sect with strange beliefs about light and darkness. A curiosity for academics, but hardly a revelation. Others argue these texts were dangerous precisely because they dared to offer an alternative map of salvation, one that bypassed priests, temples, and power structures. A gospel that taught not obedience, but awakening. Science and archaeology provide us with dates, materials, and historical context. They can carbon date the papyrus, trace the inks, and compare the dialects of Coptic. But science cannot measure the weight of silence. It cannot explain why some truths vanish from history, only to resurface when the world is once again at a crossroads. And so we are left with the mystery. Did these manuscripts survive by accident, or by design? Was their burial a desperate attempt to protect them from destruction, or a deliberate act to preserve them for a future age, our age, when humanity might be ready to hear them? Listen closely, and you'll notice something haunting. These writings do not read like old relics. They feel alive. They speak directly to the seeker, not to the institution. They whisper of inner knowledge, of the divine spark within. In an age where people once again question authority, question history, question the very stories we are told about who we are, can it be a coincidence that these voices from the sands return now? The desert has a way of keeping secrets. Empires rise, religions dominate, dogmas calcify. But beneath the shifting sands, the earth waits patiently. And sometimes, when the time is right, it exhales, releasing fragments of forgotten truth. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine holding one of those fragile codices in your hands. The ink faded, the edges frayed, but the words still burning with urgency. Imagine the countless hands that once turned those pages in candlelight, whispering teachings too radical to be spoken aloud. And ask yourself, if knowledge is a kind of fire, who decides when the world is ready to burn? The Nag Hammadi texts remain, not as answers, but as questions sharpened by centuries of silence. Their existence is a reminder that history is not a straight line, but a labyrinth. And somewhere in its shadows, the past still whispers, offering us fragments of a truth that could change everything, if we dare to listen. So the question remains. Were these writings lost, or were they hidden? Were they buried in fear of destruction, or left behind in hope that one day, seekers like you would uncover them again? Perhaps the sands of Egypt have not yet finished speaking. Perhaps, even now, they guard secrets that could rewrite the story of humanity. And perhaps, just beyond the edge of what we call history, the whispers continue.